On this Sunday night, a tsunami strikes Indonesia's coast. Those in its path were caught completely by surprise. Hundreds are dead, and that number will rise. Why was there no warning?
The shutdown hopefully will not last long.
A day of lashing out and digging in. An angry, isolated President Trump removes his Secretary of Defense earlier than expected. And then there's that government shutdown. What's happening at the White House? Plus, scrambling for power ahead of the holidays. Why it will be a dark Christmas for many in British Columbia. This is The National. It was that fast. No one at this private beach concert had a clue it was coming. The tsunami plowed in, killing at least 2 members of the band and dozens in the crowd. The singer survived, but in this video said his wife is missing. In his desperation, he posted this photo of happier times, praying against hope that she's alive and she'll be found. And that's just a fraction of the suffering after the tsunami crashed ashore on both sides of Indonesia's Sunda Strait, between Java and Sumatra, with no warning at all. So at least 222 people are dead, hundreds are seriously hurt, dozens more missing, and those numbers will almost certainly go up. But as Renee Filipponi explains, what so many are struggling with is the shock of it all.
The ground didn't shake. There were no alarm signals and no time to run. This woman was watching TV when she heard a rumbling sound. She says the water came in quickly and dragged her out. When it started receding, she decided to run, and then the water came back for a second time. First responders on the ground are not only dealing with colossal material damage, but their own shock.
Last night, it was quite strange because I can see that the level of the water was high, and then there's a rumbling sound. It was not only sound, but also vibration.
The affected area is busy this time of year. Tourists flock to the beach towns for the holidays. For locals, like this woman, it's incomprehensible. We were all set up for Christmas, she says, but it's been destroyed by the waves. The rest has been stolen. What am I going to do, she asks. And perhaps the images that best articulate the shock of it all, this widely circulated video showing Indonesian pop band 17 performing when the waves struck. Today, the lead singer released this video, clearly emotional, speaking about band members that were killed and others connected with the group that are still missing. And today, a second panic after a false alarm said another tsunami was coming, adding fear to the pain of losing family and homes. Many now don't want to go home.
So, Renee, it is daytime now in Indonesia. What is the latest?
Well, Adrian, the daylight will help in the search for the missing as authorities work hard to identify all the victims. Now, there are some areas that first responders just simply haven't been able to get to yet. And another challenge is the fact that there could be another tsunami. Don't forget, this is a very active volcano and it will continue to erupt for the days and weeks to come. So there is a real possibility that another disastrous wave could come before people even have a chance to recover from this one.
Okay, Renee, we'll be watching. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
So probably the most persistent question in all of this, you've heard it before, why was there no warning? Well, scientists say the blame lies in the nature of the disaster itself. Previous tsunamis, like the 2004 disaster that killed close to 250,000 people, were caused by underwater earthquakes. Investigators believe this time it was an undersea landslide. So after the volcano blew, part of the mountainside collapsed, displacing water and causing the wave. You might think earthquake, landslide, what difference does that make? Short answer, it's all about advance notice. Earthquakes can be detected from far away, giving authorities extra time to send tsunami alerts. And even though the Anak Krakatau volcano had been actively rumbling away for weeks, there's no way to predict a landslide. This event was so sudden and so localized, an expert from the U.S. Geological Survey called this disaster, quote, the ultimate no-notice event. Now, Canada's Prime Minister expressed his condolences today. In a tweet, Justin Trudeau called the disaster shocking and tragic. He also said Canada is ready to help if needed. As far as we know at this point, no Canadians have been affected by the tsunami, but Global Affairs Canada says it is ready to act if that should change. The Prime Minister was busy this weekend. He also made a secret visit to Canadian peacekeepers at their camp in Gao, Mali. Canada is there under the banner of the United Nations. It's one of 40 countries on this peacekeeping mission. Canada has only been part of the effort for a few months, but the Prime Minister insists this country's troops are already making a difference. Even so, as Murray Brewster explains, Justin Trudeau will not extend Canada's time on the ground, even though the UN really wants it to.
It is called the golden hour, the time most critical for successful emergency treatment. And Canada has put a new spin on it for its peacekeeping mission in Mali, bringing the trauma room to the patients as opposed to the other way around.
We've been working really hard for a long time on this capability. It's new. It's the first time that Canada has ever put doctors and nurses to the front lines.
It is both stressful and exhilarating for Lieutenant Jennifer Loy, a critical care nurse from Vancouver.
All of a sudden, the things that I'm doing there, I have to do in a very small space with a lot of kit on.
It is making treatment swifter and more effective.
We're able to do damage control resuscitation with our blood products and medications, giving the patients a greater chance of survival.
Since arriving here in August, Canadian helicopters have conducted 5 aeromedical evacuations. Now, that might not seem like a lot, but there are those that argue that having medical teams on standby is important because of the number of casualties that have taken place in this mission.
All the UN operations are able to be more effective, are able to do more because there is that 24-hour, 7-day-a-week backup.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau got a ride along during the weekend, witnessing a simulated casualty pickup with German troops playing the parts of the wounded. He insisted it is a meaningful contribution, yet refuses to extend the 1-year mission timeline as requested by the UN.
Part of that way Canada can best help involves taking on an operation, demonstrating how it could be done in the absolute best possible way, and helping others gain in those capacities.
How that went over with the Prime Minister of Mali this weekend is unclear. They met during Trudeau's 4-hour visit. They discussed surging violence and the struggling peace process in the increasingly dangerous nation.
These helicopters will come home next summer, just before the next federal election. And Canadians are going to be left to judge if this one peace support mission has truly accomplished anything lasting and whether Canada is truly back on the world stage. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Gao, Mali.
Let's go to Washington now, where detractors from within President Trump's own ranks are getting a bit louder. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis abruptly resigned on Thursday following Trump's decision to pull troops out of Syria. Mattis said he would stay on the job until the end of February, but on Twitter this morning, Trump told him to get out now, saying the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Patrick Shanahan, would take over January 1st.
Mattis and he just could never get on the same page. And the president has told people since the campaign that he wanted to get out of Syria. I think he's entitled to have a Secretary of Defense who is committed to that same end.
So why push Mattis out so fast? Arguably, it has to do with the Defense Secretary's resignation letter, the sting of it taking a few days to really sink in at the White House. Mattis's note blasted the president for rejecting American allies, a criticism echoed over the last few days by Democrats and some Republicans.
This one matters. This one matters to our country. It matters to our foreign interest. This matters to our citizens.
But Americans could be forgiven for worrying more about the partial shutdown of their government. That has led to the closing of dozens of U.S. federal agencies and departments, a shutdown that's a casualty of a fight over funding over Donald Trump's border wall. As Ron Charles reports, the president is digging in.
The national Christmas tree in the park behind the White House sits off limits, the lights out. Perhaps a fitting symbol for the kind of Christmas almost 800,000 federal employees could face without pay.
This is a passion for us, serving the American public. And with these continual threats of a shutdown, it's very demoralizing.
There is still a chasm of disagreement between Trump and Congress over spending for a southern border wall, his key campaign promise.
There is frankly no path towards his getting $5 billion in American taxpayer money to meet his campaign promise of a big, beautiful wall with Mexico. There is a path towards our responsibly appropriating about $1.3 billion for border security.
There are now indications from the White House that Trump is willing to budge on the amount as long as the wall is funded. His acting chief of staff wouldn't say by how much.
Yeah, I will tell you this. They are at 1.3 yesterday. We were at $5 billion a couple of days ago, and the counter offer that we gave them yesterday was between those two numbers.
It's a spectacle.
One Republican senator who frequently criticizes Trump calls the shutdown juvenile.
This is a made-up fight, so the president can look like he's fighting, but even if he wins, our borders are going to be insecure.
Trump put his Christmas holiday in Florida on hold to stay in Washington during the impasse. After heading home to their holiday yesterday, U.S. lawmakers won't be able to hold another vote on a spending bill to reopen the government before Thursday at the earliest. But many are predicting the shutdown will last into the new year, when the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives, making it even more difficult for Trump to implement his agenda. Ron Charles, CBC News, Washington.
While we're talking about disruptions, thousands of people in British Columbia are facing a Christmas in chaos because, in all likelihood, they'll be in the dark with no electricity. This is already the fourth evening without power for them. That's because, as Chris O'Neill Yates explains, a massive windstorm knocked over trees and power lines across BC's south coast on Thursday, and it's not an easy fix.
The destruction spread far and wide. It's not the kind of holiday season that many had hoped for. Christine Tam is visiting her mom on Pender Island.
Things are pretty rough. There's no power at all anywhere on the island. And so a lot of people are preparing for Christmas without power and without turkeys and no Christmas lights. So it's pretty depressing, I would say.
Trees across power lines mean no electricity. It also means most of the roads are impassable. Some people don't have drinking water. Pender Island's community hall has opened its doors with a warm welcome and hot food for those who need it. Last Thursday's storm was the worst in 20 years, says the Minister of Public Safety, Mike Farnworth.
There are literally hundreds and hundreds of power poles that have been downed. There are thousands and thousands of trees. Many roads have been made impassable, which makes getting the system back up and running that much more challenging.
Power is out across much of Salt Spring Island as well. The same goes for Tofino. The bulk of those without power, now 45,000 customers, are on Vancouver Island. On the mainland, life is returning to normal after a battering by winds 4 days ago. Power has been restored to over 500,000 customers. BC Hydro has 800 people in the field today, including reinforcements from Alberta and the East Coast.
Customers in the most severe hit areas, such as the Gulf Islands and areas on Vancouver Island, we do expect them to be without power through Christmas Day, fortunately.
The RCMP is urging people to be careful when heating their homes.
A propane cook stove or a camping stove, monitor candles, be careful with your gas-powered generator or whatever you're using. We just want people to be cognizant and everyone to be safe for the holidays.
For those left in the dark through the holidays, the most important gift this season will be patience. Chris O'Neill Yates, CBC News, Vancouver.
High winds and heavy rains also hit parts of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick over the weekend, causing delays at airports and ferry terminals. You're looking at about 3,000 homes and businesses without electricity at the peak of that storm. Power has since been restored, but as Kayla Hounsell explains, some residents in the Maritimes are growing increasingly frustrated with the number of outages there.
As Judy Gilmore gets ready for the holidays, she's also preparing for the possibility she could be left in the dark.
We've had a lot of windstorms. The wind gusts seem to be getting worse, especially in the winter.
So outside, another kind of tree trimming. Because when it comes to knocking out power in Nova Scotia, trees are the #1 culprit.
Trees can knock out power for days.
Mark Ryan is a linesman for Nova Scotia Power, and he runs a side business trimming trees. He says business is good and getting better.
Ever since we've had those storms, like last year was a bad one at Christmas time, and people are more aware of their trees now. One time people didn't really care too much about trees and tree work, but they see the damage that it can cause.
Nova Scotia Power customers experienced 1.5 million hours of interruption due to tree contacts with power lines last year. That's including during major storms. The utility invests $20 million a year in vegetation management, but that doesn't always work.
There are a lot of areas where we can't cut trees because residents don't want us to remove the trees from their property.
The failure of Nova Scotia Power's own equipment is also high on the list, with customers experiencing more than 550,000 hours of interruption as a result. In November, nearly half the customers in Nova Scotia were left in the dark, including much of Halifax, where there was no significant weather. It was caused by heavy, wet snow on transmission lines in Cape Breton, where most of the province's power is generated.
We actually had multiple transmission lines impacted by that storm, and actually we had backup upon backup upon backup go out. It was an extremely rare event.
It prompted outcry on social media. Are the transmission lines held with bubblegum? One person asked. Is Nova Scotia's power grid one of those old strings of Christmas lights where one goes out and the whole thing is off? Posted another. But the utility insists everything worked as it should that day, that the system shut down to protect itself from further damage.
I just wonder if they're really putting the money into the infrastructure, because it seems like there's an awful lot of them.
It has Gilmore, and it seems many others, thinking about generators.
The instant there's a hint of a storm coming, we get all kinds of calls here.
Derek Payton says generator sales are phenomenal this year.
We went from selling no generators in this store to selling probably in excess of 250 generators a year.
Everyone seems to agree there are more storms and stronger winds, and electricity is a casualty. Kayla Hounsel, CBC News, East LaHave, Nova Scotia.
Here are some of the other stories we're following tonight, beginning with Canadian boxer Adonis Stevenson. So that was Stevenson being knocked out at a boxing match on December 1st in Quebec City. That blow left him with a traumatic brain injury that required surgery. He was in a medically induced coma for 3 weeks, but his girlfriend says he has now regained consciousness.
I am satisfied that they are no longer suspects in this investigation, and they have, it's fair to say, to their credit, they have cooperated with us throughout.
And that's British police acknowledging a couple arrested on suspicion of causing disruption at London's Gatwick Airport with the drone did not do it. They've been released without charge, but in what feels like a breakthrough, police have recovered a damaged drone near the airport. They're carrying out tests on it now. The airport is also offering an $85,000 reward for the real culprit.
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition, liftoff.
And there it goes, a SpaceX rocket carrying a U.S. Air Force GPS satellite successfully blasted off from Cape Canaveral in Florida this morning. This marks the first U.S. national security space mission for Elon Musk's rocket company. Still ahead on the National, as Vladimir Putin continues to deny involvement in the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal, Chris Brown takes us inside a Moscow classroom to see the spin. Plus, the Sunday interview, Rosie's conversation with author Yuval Harari, AI, algorithms, fake news, a guide to 21st century living. And a Toronto family's hunt for the flight attendant who left a lifelong impression 35 years after a good deed. They just want to say thanks.
I want to say thank you so much. You have given our family such a great opportunity, and I just want to be able to kind of tell her the next part of what happened after she dropped us off the next morning.
На мой взгляд, российско-британские отношения находятся в тупике.
In his year-end news conference, Vladimir Putin lamented that Russian-British relations are in a deadlock, but he didn't mention why. Might not be hard to figure that out, though. London blames Moscow for the attempted assassination on British soil of former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. In March, they were poisoned, and though they recovered, the brazen crime still grates. The case is now being taught at a Russian university, but it's a total departure from Britain's narrative. Our Moscow correspondent Chris Brown asked students what they believe.
Moscow State University looks like a real ivory tower. Arguably, it's Russia's most prestigious learning institution. Yet what's being taught in the classroom would be dismissed as propaganda in most Western countries. Professor Andrei Manoilo is lecturing his students about Western disinformation campaigns that target Russia. And his case study on this night, the Novichok poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal in Salisbury in March.
Skripalей отравили очень грубо. This was a sloppy attempt at poisoning on the Skripals that could not have been done by Russian intelligence, because Russian intelligence does not work this way.
Manoilo is a former intelligence officer with Russia's FSB security service, so it's not surprising he'd say that. What is notable are the statements he makes that go unchallenged and the powerful evidence he omits that point to Russian involvement in the poisoning. For example, the many photographs of the two suspected Russian agents arriving in Britain and being near the Skripal's home, all the work of Western intelligence agencies, he says.
Любые кадры, любую съемку можно поделать. Any footage, any photos can be doctored. For this, there are special programs. They can be made to look very realistic.
He tells the students that investigations by independent journalists that showed the suspected assassins were actually decorated members of Russia's military intelligence. Those should not be believed.
Есть инсайдер, есть Bellingcat, которые находятся под... Bellingcat, the journalism collective that drove the coverage of the Skripal poisonings, is under the control of MI6.
Both of these are demonstrably untrue statements.
Vienna-based journalist Christo Grozev works with Bellingcat. He broke many of those stories himself.
So are all of these Russian media also, and the relatives also in on the big spy conspiracy? Are they trying to mislead everybody? That doesn't make any sense.
Whether the students believe what they're being taught is hard to say. Most who would talk to us were either reluctant to challenge their professor or simply said they accepted his explanation.
Studies, we need to consider situations from different ways.
The adversarial relationship between Russia and the West these days is characterized by efforts to confuse and obfuscate. The curriculum here suggests Russia's security service believes the university classroom is a good place to start with the training. Chris Brown, CBC News, Moscow.
Still ahead on the National, a family search to find the flight attendant who went above and beyond 35 years ago. You don't want to miss our moment. Plus, when was the last time you let a computer make a decision for you? It was probably more recent than you think.
It starts with simple things, like daily things, finding your way around town.
Head west, then you will arrive at your destination.
You rely less on your own knowledge and instincts. You rely more on Google Maps.
Author Yuval Harari on algorithms, AI, and how our reliance on tech is changing humanity. The Sunday interview is next. Artificial intelligence is changing lives everywhere. This new Japanese robot mimics affection when users show it kindness. It's supposed to teach children how to love. China harnessed AI for customs inspections. Human workers took about 30 minutes to scan the contents of a truck. Computers are doing it in 5 seconds with greater accuracy. And during the Cyber Monday Shopping Fest, Amazon's #1 seller around the world was its own Echo device. It responds to your commands and helps you run your household, although you probably already know that. If you find it all a bit creepy, then you're in line with one of the great popular thinkers of our time. Yuval Harari has some surprising warnings about artificial intelligence and other forces reshaping the world, like fake news or the rise of nationalism. Rosie found some of his thoughts a bit alarming when she spoke with him this fall. So here's another look at their in-depth conversation.
Yuval Harari thinks big for a living. Not so long ago, he was an obscure history professor, but his 2014 book, Sapiens, changed all that. He explored the past, cramming 150,000 years of human history into 400 pages.
Authority will shift.
Transforming himself into a literary phenomenon.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome once again Yuval Noah Harari.
Name dropped by the likes of Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and Barack Obama.
The other book that I really enjoyed, a book by an Israeli author, Yuval Harari.
His follow-up book, Homo Deus, tackled the future, elevating Harari to a sort of digital visionary. Now he's back with his take on the present day. His new book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, explores the influence of algorithms on our everyday lives, how artificial intelligence will affect and maybe even replace us.
Thanks for coming to visit the lab.
And even his antidote to fake news. I met up with Yuval Harari to talk about some of today's most pressing issues at the National Arts Centre in Ottawa. I found parts of the book a little scary or daunting, particularly the parts around artificial intelligence, AI, and the way that is, probably without us thinking about it too much, sort of taking over our lives. Is it something that you think human beings should be more worried about or more conscious of?
We need to be aware of the immense potential of artificial intelligence, both positive and negative potential. The most important thing to know about technology is that technology is never deterministic. Every technology opens different doors to different social and political systems. In the 20th century, we could use the technology of the Industrial Revolution, electricity and trains and radio and television, to build communist dictatorships or fascist regimes or liberal democracies. The electricity didn't tell you what to do with it. No. You had different options. It's the same with AI. We can use it to create paradise or hell. It's still up to us.
But there's a part of AI that you talk about in the book that, this is the part that worried me, where it seems as though it is taking away our power to make decisions and choices. And I wonder, what is the impact on humans when that skill is either erased or at least eroded?
We don't know. What we do know is that we are already seeing a shift in authority from humans to algorithms. It starts with simple things, like daily things, finding your way around town.
Head west, then you will arrive at your destination.
You rely less on your own knowledge and instincts. You rely more on Google Maps. And it's the same with what book to read, what TV series to watch, and so forth. But then it can go all the way to deciding what to study in university, where to work, whom to marry, whom to vote for.
I know that people are asking the question about social responsibility around AI and whether there's a way to sort of embed that in AI. So is there, I guess, is the question, and what would that do if we try to sort of mimic human behavior in a good way?
In a good way.
Yeah.
One scenario which people often don't think about is that as AI becomes better in understanding our feelings and emotions and reacting to them, we might actually become very intolerant of humans because they are less empathic than the computers and the robots. Usually the main argument against AI doctors or AI teachers is that, but I want my doctor to understand my feelings. So there are two problems with the human doctor. First of all, it's not always easy to know how the patient feels. If you're a human, you rely on all kinds of external signals, like what you say and the tone of voice and facial expression, but it's limited. And secondly, the doctor has her own emotions. Maybe she just had a big fight with her husband in the morning, and she's busy reconstructing this fight, and she can't really bother with you too much. But with an AI, it will never happen, because the AI has no husband, has no feelings of its own. It's completely attuned to you. There is the science fiction movie Her, which explores this scenario in a very interesting way.
Please wait as your operating system is initiated.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi.
Hi.
it reverses the kind of fear people usually have. People usually fear that the computers will not care about us. But actually, the problem might be the opposite. They will care about us so much more than the average human that we will be very intolerant of most human relationships.
Okay, now I'm worried. You talk about fake news, which is something that we are talking about probably far too often.
Yeah.
Or maybe not enough. And you put the onus really on people to do a better job at trying to discern what is real and what is fake. But I wondered whether there was some way for algorithms to do a better job at putting a value on facts and truth.
Well, the main issue is really the model of the news market. People have got used to a model which says free information, free exciting information, in exchange for your attention. And attention becomes the main resource. And everybody's trying to grab your attention. And the best way to do it is with exciting fake news. And people don't realize that this free information actually costs us a lot. And we really need to change the model of the information market, and in particular of the news market. A much better model would be information, high quality information that costs you a lot of money, but doesn't abuse your attention. I mean, people are willing to pay for high quality food and high quality clothes and high quality cars. Why not pay for high quality information? I mean, it's so obvious.
But what do you do when you have the President of the United States trafficking in fake news?
I don't know.
A few days ago, I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are.
He's using it to an advantage, a political advantage.
Of course, but again, he is talking basically to his base.
Yes.
I mean, and what we need to understand about human beings is that, again, it's almost all human beings throughout history. Humans think in stories, not in facts, not in statistics. You can almost, it's very difficult to change people's opinions and loyalties just by bombarding them with more facts. You need to change the story. The only thing that is really effective against one story is another story. So if, for example, somebody is going around talking all the time about immigration and nationalism and my country first and only my country is important.
Someone named Donald Trump, yes.
We won't name anybody. It's not just him. It's quite common, this story today. We should remind people that, look, humans now face 3 existential dangers. It's nuclear war, climate change, and technological disruption. All these problems are global problems. They cannot be solved by any single nation, however powerful. So anybody who cries, my country first, I would ask, what is your nationalist solution to climate change? What is your solution to nuclear war? How can your country by itself, without cooperation with other countries, deal with it? There is no national way to do it. We can only do it through global cooperation.
You start the book saying that we are at a moment where we are looking for a story, a new story, that we are unhappy with small L liberalism, the story it has presented to us, or worried about what's happening next. How do humans find that story?
It's one of the most difficult questions in history. How do you create and spread a story? Now, the liberal story has been the best story for quite a long time and benefited humanity enormously. But what we need to realize is that as conditions change, as the technological realities change, and as a result, economic and political realities change, the way we understand the world must also change. And what was very good and beneficial 50 years ago might not be adaptable to the new conditions. Unfortunately, at present, the only thing that the political system in most of the world is able to generate are nostalgic fantasies about going back to the past.
The golden era.
They have no real vision for where humankind will be in 30 years, in 50 years. Nobody has any idea how the world would look like in 2050, how the job market would look like, how the political system would look like. And what we get from too many leaders is nostalgic fantasies.
Let me end on this. given everything we've been talking about. Do you worry?
Yes.
You do. You do worry about this.
Yes, but I also, we need to balance being worried and being hopeful, and remind ourselves that the future is not inevitable. Humans are able to rise to the occasion and to confront these enormous challenges, but it depends on our wisdom.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much.
Okay, thoughtful and terrifying. Next on The National, using tech for good.
How much carbon dioxide are you able to trap?
So this particular project is just under 14,000 pounds of CO2, essentially, that's captured in there.
A unique fix for carbon emissions next. But first, here's Andrew with a preview of some special year-end programming you can catch right here on The National over the holidays.
It was so intimately tragic. 16 people died, 13 people were injured.
The stories that moved you.
Where do you set your goals now?
I just set my goals, like if I have to get into a wheelchair today, I'm gonna sit that longer than I did yesterday.
The people, the moments we won't forget.
The shot of those kids and their coach huddled on the rock, sitting there, essentially waiting to be rescued was just unbelievable.
Brett's assault on me.
What it must have taken for her to do that. How hard that was to do, knowing the fallout that would come from that.
And the CBC News journalists who witnessed it all.
It's a serial killer.
Always respectful of the fact that these are people's lives and there are families out there grieving.
As 2018 comes to a close, The National brings you the stories behind the stories.
There was a lot of celebration.
Yes, it is. A lot of happy people here tonight in Thailand.
Mr. Kushner, we're live on TV in Canada. Just any insight into how things are going? Well, we tried, and I'm not allowed to go on the steps.
Keeping a straight back and then returning the cup to the saucer.
No matter whatever serious piece of journalism I do, to this day, it is the one thing that most people come up to me and say, hey, you did that tea thing.
During the holidays on The National.
Yeah, I did.
So here are some of the stories we're following this week on The National. Transport Canada is expected to unveil stricter rules for flying drones here. That plan comes after the chaos at London's Gatwick Airport last week when drones seemed to buzz the runway. Canada has seen a spike in the number of near misses involving drones in the past few years, at least 95 this year alone. And two Reuters journalists jailed while reporting on the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar will appeal tomorrow. In September, they were handed 7-year prison terms, convicted of obtaining state secrets, but their trial was seen as a sham by human rights groups around the world. The pair were arrested after investigating the massacre of 10 Rohingya Muslim men and boys during a military crackdown. In a world with an awful lot of problems, it's a relief sometimes to talk about solutions. This is maybe one of those times because concrete is the most abundant artificial material on the planet. No question, it's transformed human civilization, but creating it comes with a huge environmental cost. So earlier this fall, Andrew spoke with a Canadian company with the fix to make concrete, in a way, almost out of thin air.
The modern world is literally built out of concrete. It's everywhere.
Concrete is one of the most widely used building materials in the world.
You can look at a building, you can look at a curb, you can look at a bridge, you can look at sculptures, it's just endless. Everything uses concrete.
But the concrete industry has a problem. Making it pollutes a lot. 7% of the world's CO2 emissions link back to a single ingredient in concrete.
So if we could reduce that by any amount, it would be a success.
If you can get that number down, that's a game changer.
Yes, absolutely.
So here's how you make concrete. You need 3 things: water, random bits like sand and gravel, and cement, which is the glue that binds it all together. But making a kilogram of cement releases about half a kilogram of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So, the team at a company called Carbon Cure has devised a clever way of turning CO2 into something useful. Okay, so Josh, what do we have in this tank?
In this tank, we have liquid carbon dioxide.
Right now, they're shipping it in direct from industrial polluters, long before it ever reaches Earth's atmosphere. It's bottled up and prepped for the mixer. So this is it?
Yeah, this is the mixer.
So the CO2 from that tank outside comes in here?
Yeah, so it comes in through a pipe, directly into the mixer, mixes with the fresh concrete, reacts right away.
Yes, you heard right. They're mixing CO2 back into the concrete, sequestering it forever.
It starts reacting with the cement immediately and is permanently encapsulated in the concrete.
So even if the concrete breaks, say a building is demolished, the CO2 never escapes because it hardens. It becomes a solid. It's even strong enough to take the place of some of that expensive, polluting cement. And using less cement saves money and pays for the carbon dioxide.
It actually ends up being cost neutral?
Yes, you're getting the exact same quality concrete, only greener.
It is on a larger scale this idea starts to show real promise, because trapping concrete block by block is one thing, but by the hundreds or thousands of blocks, this plant can produce tens of thousands in a single day. Its entire product line, every single block it makes, is injected with carbon dioxide. And there are 100 plants just like this one across Canada and the US using the very same technology. But even that is just a drop in the bucket.
If there are skeptics in the concrete industry, it's because of how sensitive the whole process is. I mean, just consider this. These concrete blocks are fresh out of the mold. The mixture has to be just right. They're laser measured to make sure they're right to spec. And if anything is off, these blocks come right off and they're junk.
This is actually the area where we drilled cores out to send off to the lab for testing.
Luke Johnson works for Tridel, a major developer based in Toronto.
I needed to know exactly what it is, what it does. Does it affect my timelines? Does it affect my budget? And most importantly, one of our core values, does it affect our quality?
On this downtown site, 14 stories will ride on the strength of his concrete. The walls, your conventional run-of-the-mill stuff. But the big test, the floor, right under our feet.
And how did it do?
It performed well. The order went well.
Structurally, durability?
Structurally, all the testing, everything met the specified criteria.
And not far away, a project with Carbon Cure concrete in mind from the very start. This is going to be a hospital in Vaughan, Ontario.
This particular project is using in excess of 500,000 individual blocks.
It's an example of how a nod to the environment can pay off big. The promise of a green building was key to getting this project off the ground.
And how much carbon dioxide are you able to trap?
So this particular project is just under 14,000 pounds of CO2, essentially, that's captured in there. So to put that into more relatable terms, it'd be the equivalent of about 146 tree seedlings grown over about 10 years.
That's trapped in that building
yeah.
once it's done.
Right.
Across all of its projects, Carbon Cure estimates it's kept millions of kilograms of CO2 from escaping into the atmosphere. The challenge now is getting the word out and convincing companies it can pay to go green. Doing that would go a long way in turning one of the world's most prolific greenhouse gases into simple building blocks.
Next on The National, the family looking to thank an Air Canada flight attendant for a good deed more than 3 decades ago. That's our moment right after the break. In November 1984, the woman and the little boy in this picture emigrated to Canada to join her husband in Montreal. But when their plane made a stop in Toronto, they just got off, followed the crowd, and found themselves in the wrong city. They spoke no English and had no money. An Air Canada flight attendant helped them book a flight for the next morning, and then she did something extraordinary. She opened her home and her heart to the helpless strangers. Now, nearly 35 years later, the family has reached out on Facebook to find that Good Samaritan.
So, my mom and I, without a penny, without knowing anybody in Toronto, had nowhere else to go. And so this flight attendant took us into her own home and kind of let us, took care of us for the evening. And then the very next morning took us back to the airport so that we could catch our flight from Toronto to Montreal to reunite with my dad. Everything a lost a mother and a child needed that night through to the next morning, she generously provided and opened up to us.
I have seen a lot of videos of how social media has reunited people. I thought kind of, well, we have a story and this would be the perfect time to do it. We're kind of getting sentimental around the Christmas season, and yeah, we kind of had the idea for a while, but we thought now is the time.
I just want to be able to kind of tell her the next part of what happened after she dropped us off the next morning, and I want to just hug her and give her all the love that she gave us that night, and to be able to say a big thank you.
What this story means to me is it really demonstrates that there are people out there in the world who are so willing to help others who don't necessarily look like them or speak like them, and I've always thought of this as a very Canadian type of a story.
So, does this ring a bell? A flight to Toronto from Hong Kong, November 1984. Was that you? If it was you, A, you're a great Canadian. B, get in touch with us. There is a family that really wants to say thank you. Air Canada is in on the act as well, just trying to find this woman. That is The National for Sunday, December 23rd.